Today's episode of the Energy Question podcast is brought to you by Enverus. The energy industry faces challenges every day, and the events of the last 2 years have caused massive disruptions like never before. Companies in the energy industry need actionable intelligence and a single source of truth that brings all the data together. Enverus is the energy specialized technology partner that provides intelligent connections for a global energy ecosystem. Only Enverus has the analytics, people, experience, and industry scope to connect the right data and information in the right way to discover missed opportunities and deliver fast outcomes. Find out more at Enverus.com. That's ENVERUS.com.
Hello, welcome to the Energy Question podcast with David Blackman. I'm David Blackman, your host, and our special guest today, very special guest, is Dave Callahan, President and CEO. Dave, is it President and CEO?
President
of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, a fabulous organization located up in the biggest natural gas producing basin on the face of the earth. And before we get started, I want to thank the Sandstone Group for hosting and producing our show, and to Enverus, the great folks at Enverus, for being our sponsor. Dave, before we get into the question and answer about what's going on in the business up there, I wanted to give you a chance to tell our viewers about your background and the Marcellus Shale Coalition itself, how it started, and the services it provides to your members and to the communities up there.
Well, thank you, David. And first and foremost, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. You've assembled quite a list of folks who have appeared on the podcast before. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure spending time with you. And as I said earlier, I feel like you're so accomplished, I should be interviewing you, but I'll play along for now.
Thanks.
I'm president of the Marcellus Shale Coalition, or MSC, as we abbreviate it from time to time. We're a statewide trade association here in Pennsylvania. We have about 130 members representing the upstream, midstream, downstream segments of the industry, as well as many companies and entities who provide goods and services to the industry. We're knee-deep, neck-deep, actually, in advocacy activities, legislative and regulatory affairs, public affairs activities, and we also do a lot of work on the ground helping our members collaboratively solve problems out in the field, whether it's in the upstream, midstream, or downstream segments. We're a very active organization. We date back to 2008, at the very beginning of the Marcellus play. Personally, I've been a part of the coalition in one form or another since 2010. Actually worked here for a short time, and I've worked and served on the executive board of the organization through a couple of different member companies. One other advertisement. I don't want to take up all the time.
No, advertise away. That's great.
I pride myself in the organization on the way that we collaborate with our friends and neighbors in Ohio and West Virginia, and any number of our national allies as well. We've got great working relationships across the board, and collaboration is the key to the game these days.
Yeah. And then of course, the group's called Marcellus Shale Coalition, but really you guys probably, I know, have members who also are big producers in the Utica play as well, right? And into Michigan and Ohio and into that part of the world.
Certainly. Obviously, all our members have operations here in Pennsylvania. Our members are, nationwide, but they operate here in PA, and PA is our focus. And of course, some of our members are exploring the Utica as well as the Marcellus.
Yeah.
We're blessed here in Pennsylvania to have both wet and dry gas resources here, opening up many, many opportunities for natural gas liquids as well as dry gas production.
Yeah, so hey, let's talk about natural gas liquids and liquefied natural gas as a starting point here. There was a recent article that I saw last week, I think it was in Bloomberg, that was kind of talking about the Marcellus Shale producers kind of getting a little bit left out of the big expanding market for LNG exports in the United States. I know there has been some activity up there, and of course, some of the Marcellus gas gets shipped via pipeline to the Gulf Coast. But I just wonder, do you see any future prospects developing for the Marcellus to become more of a player in that international LNG market?
We would certainly like to see that happen. And clearly, from the very beginning of the shale play up here, folks had talked about how great it would be to have an outlet in or near Philadelphia, in or near some part of the Atlantic coast to really open up opportunities for Marcellus and Utica natural gas. As a matter of fact, later this week, I'll be testifying down in Philadelphia at a hearing of one of our Pennsylvania Senate committees on the topic of LNG exports. It takes a combination of things, as you well know, to help that, to facilitate that. Number one, we need the policies. We need the policies in place to allow the infrastructure to be developed. More than ever, we're facing a dearth of federal policies, or many federal policies, that really stymie the development of pipelines, stymie the development of other facilities necessary to serve markets, both domestically and internationally. We need a clear-headed approach to policy to help make that happen. And of course, we need the capital to make that happen. And while it can be a bit of a chicken and egg issue, we need the government not just to enact the right policies and enforce the right policies. We need the words that the government uses in government officials, either standing government officials or those who have been nominated for very important government positions, to talk about the industry in the proper way, so as not to scare off investment, not to scare off current or future employees or others.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw it today, but on the day we're recording this, there was a report that natural gas prices here in Texas at the Waha hub in West Texas, the Permian Basin, fell to near zero because of pipeline capacity constraints to get the natural gas out of the basin there. Are you seeing similar constraints developing in the Marcellus Shale? And if so, do you feel like there's potential to alleviate those problems in the near future?
Well, prices have historically traded up here at various market hubs at a discount to Henry Hub. It's something that we live from nearly the very beginning of the play. And it's something that we'd love to see resolved with increased capacity. That's the solution. That's the common sense solution to, again, helping serve our markets both domestically and internationally, and opening up more development here. As you said, we're atop of one of the best resources in the entire world here in the Marcellus and Utica shale plays. And we need the resources here to efficiently and effectively tap those resources and get that product out.
Yeah, and I wonder how many people, I don't think a lot of people really understand. I get a lot of questions about, well, why isn't the industry drilling more? Why isn't it producing more? I don't feel like people, most people, and of course, most people don't have any reason to understand it, but they really don't understand how investment or lack of investment and lack of permitting to build the takeaway midstream capacity depresses your ability to actually drill wells, right? And it's the same in the Marcellus Basin as it is anywhere else, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The capacity is key. Capacity is key. I recall one of the earlier Marcellus Shale Coalition conferences, our annual conferences called Shale Insight. One of the earlier presentations from the early days of the conference, say around 2011, 2012, was titled "The Cavalry is Coming," talking about various NGL pipelines that are coming to help save Pennsylvania production and increase production of natural gas liquids. We need the cavalry right now. We need the cavalry to come marching into Pennsylvania to allow more capacity to be built.
Yeah. So again, also as we're recording this, elections are approaching there in Pennsylvania and all over the country, but we're talking Pennsylvania here. And I know you are in it every day. What do you hear candidates on the campaign trail saying about all this? Is there a good, robust discussion in these elections about what we need to do to really, help spur growth there in Pennsylvania?
Well, we certainly need elected leaders, no matter who they are, no matter what party they come from, to understand the value of the resource to Pennsylvania's economy, to understand the value to Pennsylvania's environment and the world's environment as well. And it's our hope that regardless of who's elected, we're going to work with them to share that good information because, we're a fair arbiter. We deal in facts. David, you've done it in your career. We're doing it now. We're held to a very high standard in the facts that we share, and we're going to share good, solid facts with elected legislators, chief executives. We have an open contest for the U.S. Senate coming up, a highly publicized open contest
highly
for the U.S.
publicized
Senate seat. There's actually a debate this evening, the day that we're recording this, the one and only debate.
The one and only.
We expect to hear, and we expect to hear energy being mentioned at the very least.
Yeah, I would certainly expect that. It's such a huge question. When we talk about pipelines, one of the really vexing problems in the northeastern part of the United States has been the inability to get pipeline capacity built out of the Marcellus Shale, just 300 miles across New York State into the New England states to supply natural gas up there. And now we are already hearing talk about the potential for rolling blackouts on the grid in the New England area due to lack of fuel supply. Talk a little bit about why that's happened up there, what have been the driving dynamics behind it, and how can we ever hope to fix it? We've been talking about this for a long time now, probably 10 years.
We have been talking about it for a long time. I'll just go back to last year and point out that the ISO operator said that they would need a combination of skill and luck to make it through the winter.
Yeah.
They haven't learned much in terms of what they went through last year, and to your point, for the last 10 years or so. There's a significant adequacy problem when it comes to supplying natural gas, not only for home heating, for manufacturers and others, but for power generation. And now New England is importing, obviously they're importing power thanks to the Jones Act, importing natural gas from other companies and other countries, and they're competing with other international customers, not just for the gas, mind you, but for the tankers themselves. Some say that a simple tweak of the Jones Act will fix all this. Well, it might help to a degree. However, you're still in competition for those tankers. And I don't know if you saw published reports from a week or so ago, or some maybe 3 dozen tankers floating around Spain just waiting to get in line to liquefy the capacity. Now, to get to your question, what do we need? Jones Act would help, something along those lines, but we need the pipelines, and we need the states between Pennsylvania, New England, hint, hint, New York, to stop the abuse of the Clean Water Act's 401 certification process, to stop pipelines. They've stopped any number of projects or held up projects into submission based on just opposition to natural gas, the utilization of natural gas, and not necessarily on Clean Water Act provisions.
Yeah. And I make this mistake, and I'm sure you don't, because you're so much closer to it. I occasionally make the mistake, and I think it's a mistake, to blame the FERC and the federal government for that situation. But really, New York State, and of course the activists who push all this, have really been more of a driver of that kind of land blockade that New York State has been on this than the FERC has even been in getting these interstate pipelines permitted and approved, correct?
Well, certainly FERC has played a role.
Yes.
But when it comes to actually putting the clamps down, it is that 401 certification process. We had I'll mention, we had our big conference at the end of September, and I had a fireside chat involving a company representative and Neil Chatterjee, former chairman of FERC. And I did my research prior to that fireside chat, and I saw one of his podcasts for his law firm indicating that he said, we ought to leave natural gas policy or energy policy in the hands of the engineers, and take it out of the hands of the politicians. And we would not have any more problems with reliability, resiliency, affordability, and sustainability. Well, we all deal in advocacy on a regular basis. We'd love to see a little bit of that common sense prevail.
I've always found it so almost irrational, this fear of natural gas that's been promoted in this campaign to prevent these pipelines. I wrote a story last January. I came across some data from the ISO up there in New England. One day in January, they actually 26% of the power generation on this day in January was not from natural gas, not from coal, not from wind or solar, but from burning fuel oil, which is a method of home heating that, my gosh, is really antiquated and obviously not ideal for environmental purposes. And I mean, how can we at least get New England? Wouldn't it be, just from an environmental perspective, so much preferable to be generating that electricity and heating those homes with natural gas than fuel oil or coal?
New England and worldwide, when it comes to our European allies as well, they're resorting to some very, very drastic measures there as well, leading up to winter. Who knows what kind of a winter they'll face there from a humanitarian and an economic standpoint. But to your point, looking at natural gas or looking at energy through just one lens, through just a climate lens, and I'm not saying it's not important, but we have to look through several lenses, including cost, reliability, resiliency. Who are you getting it from? Where are you getting it from? What are the economic and environmental impacts of that? And it's my job. I know it's my job. It was your job at one time, but I'm firmly convinced that natural gas checks all those boxes in a way that makes it the preferred fuel, the fuel of choice, not just for heating and manufacturing processes, chemicals, and others, but for power generation as well.
Yeah. So what kind of strategies do you employ when you talk about your job, which is interfacing with these policymakers? And it's was always so disturbing to me to find such a dearth of any real knowledge, not just among the members who are dealing with 1,000 different things on any one day. And of course, I mean, you can't expect them to be experts on this, but even among the staff who's assigned to be the point person on energy about all this stuff. Talk about the kinds of strategies y'all employ at the Marcellus Shale Coalition to go about trying to just educate people on just the basic facts of all of this when it comes to these kinds of energy policy questions.
Certainly, it's the strategy and the outlets, both combined. It's the voices. It's finding credible voices, including our own, including yours. I mean, like to use this podcast as a way to share some information with our policymakers. Honestly, it's a part of repetition. Repetition is important. Sharing messages on a consistent basis, sharing opinions on what's going on in the world, what's going on in the news on a consistent basis is very important, so that legislators and others, staff, policymakers and others, don't have to think, boy, I wonder what the Marcellus Shale Coalition has to say about this today. No, they'll know, they'll find out. And obviously, it's about building that credibility by being a good person, a reliable organization, I should say, that shares good, solid, again, I'll use the term fact-based information. Here's what we're saying. Here's a footnote for it. Here's where we got it. Here's where government officials and others have said it. And again, it's using other voices as well. So when Jamie Dimon says it would be a disaster, I'm going to use my words, not his, to stop investing in fossil fuels, we get the word out. We get the word out. When the CEO of Chevron shares similar sentiments, when Toby Rice shares sentiments about LNG exports, we get the word out. We do it directly in conversing with legislators, staffers, policymakers, and others. We utilize social media. I know certain parts of social media can resemble a high school cafeteria food fight, but sometimes you got to get in there and just share the facts and take the heat. LinkedIn is another great place to share good, solid information with professionals.
So you mentioned Toby Rice, and he's a fantastic spokesman for the industry and his company. Nick DeUlius as well, very active, very outspoken, willing to really tell the story about his company and the business. Talk about how valuable it is to have CEOs like those guys and others who are really willing to get out there and talk about this in a very active way, because it's really a new breed, really, of CEOs that we're kind of seeing rise up now in the industry.
Well, and we could see others. Nick Dell'Osso from Chesapeake, Mr. Armstrong from Williams. I don't mean to leave anyone out because I know there are many others. You know, a lot of these comments were traditionally relegated to quarterly earnings calls and discussions with reporters who report on the finances of your company and what's going on. Now we see the reach of those reporters extend beyond, with the likes of CNBC, Fox Business, and others and other outlets. But we also see the CEOs and others see the tremendous challenges ahead, and they know that their voice is additive to the conversation. Their voice is important. Their opinions are important. They carry weight. They're respected, and they're out to share, again, good, solid information and their opinions on what the industry needs. Not necessarily to thrive, survive for the industry's point, but what does America need? What does the world need from energy and from energy policy? It's reached that point that they can't stay silent through those traditional outlets or stay confined to those traditional outlets any longer.
It really has, and you know, it was always such a frustration to me when I was active in the industry up until 5 or 6 years ago, that it was so difficult to get the CEOs out there to really talk about it. So it's really been a refreshing development here in the last few years. Back to the pipelines, the midstream business, and I don't mean to just overly focus on that, but it's so vital. We had Joe Manchin, of course, supported the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and got it passed. And part of the deal he made was that with Chuck Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, was that they would help him get enacted into law some language designed to speed up the permitting process at the federal level, and that language, of course, failed. Talk about what a loss that was for not just the oil and gas industry, but really all energy businesses. And do you see any prospects for that language being revived in a new Congress?
Certainly, while that particular effort in that particular format, didn't succeed, the ideas remain, the need remains. Now, whether it's done through another, whole cloth, through another mass proposal, or done in pieces, we've seen any number of members of Congress, whether the House or the Senate, introduce various reform-minded ideas that will assist with permitting, that'll provide more clarity when it comes to things, for example, like the NEPA process, restoring some of the reforms that were made during the prior administration to make it, again, straightforward, predictable, workable. I think those ideas persist. I'm hopeful that those ideas, if they're not implemented between now and the end of the year, they could be implemented with the new Congress, because, again, so many of our issues now are federal. We're an industry that, when you worked in the industry, and for the majority of my career in the industry, we focus on the state. That's where we're primarily regulated. But right now, the federal government is holding so much power over so many of these important issues. We need to focus on the federal government as well. And again, going back to my earlier point, that's where the collaboration from state to state organization, state with federal organization, and federal organizations with each other is so important. We all need to work together. We all need to share the same information, the same resources, make our voices heard to our elected officials.
So I'm working right now on a piece about improvements in the industry focused on Colorado and the DJ Basin, improvements that have come to the industry in the last several years related to the environment, social and governance policies, parts of the business. And I know you probably talk about a lot in the Marcellus area as well during your visits with policymakers. I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk about, because we don't focus on that enough, all the improvements that the industry is making in lowering emissions and things it does without having to be told by regulators necessarily to do it. And I know you've seen a lot of that since you become involved with the Marcellus Shale Coalition.
Whenever I speak with the media, I try to equally weight both the environmental national security, energy security benefits with environmental benefits, because the record is strong. I could use a couple of PA examples. Here in PA, the increased use of natural gas has reduced power generation sector CO2 emissions by 41% since 2005. Here in this basin, we're proud that we're the lowest methane intensity basin in the United States. We're getting it done. We're getting it done right. Any number of companies who operate here and operate in other basins are working with third-party organizations who independently gather and evaluate various environmental data and then rate those companies and label them, for lack of a better term, as responsible, and the product that they produce is responsibly done. Any number of operators have done that here. They're working independently with those groups. And they've also joined organizations like the Environmental Partnership, who's focused on reducing methane emissions as well. One point, getting back to the work with some of those third-party organizations, rating organizations, and that is the companies that go through this process. And again, there are many that are doing this. It's not like me before I get my cholesterol checked and I think that not eating a cheeseburger the night before my test is going to make a difference. No, these companies, what the third-party agencies are doing is they're recognizing corporate culture, corporate practices that have been long in existence in this industry. The facts that you're well aware of, facts that others are well aware of who are going to listen or watch this podcast. It's about that third-party validation. And when it comes to shareholders, when it comes to customers downstream, whether it's a utility here in the United States or a customer overseas, that's very important, because we're proud of the fact that we're operating under some of the most, if not the most stringent environmental regulations here in PA in the country, if not the world. And we're proud of the advantage for our allies, our transatlantic allies, that Pennsylvania and American produced natural gas has over Russian natural gas as well.
Yeah, our transatlantic, or the European allies that we have, of course, Dan Yergin, when I interviewed him recently, made the point that a year ago, some countries in Europe were turning away LNG cargoes because they were produced with American shale gas. And of course, now this energy crisis has completely changed all that dynamic, right? They're happy to take whatever gas they can get from any source. But the other point is, just because that dynamic has changed in Europe does not mean the work is somehow stopping here in the United States from continuing to work on these kinds of improvements, right?
Not at all, not at all. And again, I've said in any number of forums, even when the last bullet is fired in the Ukraine, I think we've fundamentally altered the energy balance in Europe as a result of Russia's aggression. I don't know how long it'll take, but what it'll do. But I think Europe is going to take a long, hard look at their energy and national security well beyond the end of this conflict. And I like to think that American natural gas, clean, abundant, reliable American natural gas, will be looked upon favorably even after the conflict as well. It's a good, reliable source of power for them. When you look at the various elements of the economy, I think I read that nearly 40% of homes in Europe are hooked up in some way to the natural gas distribution or transmission network. When you see all the industries that are dependent on natural gas who can't switch fuels, and it's just physically impossible, whether it's chemicals, fertilizers, and others, it's fundamentally important that Europe go down and continue to go down this path of energy security to not just improve themselves economically and environmentally, but from a national security standpoint.
And looking at the clock, we're running out of time here. That's a great way to wind this up, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on today, and I hope we can cycle back again shortly after the first of the year and continue our conversation.
I would love to do that. And maybe, again, that's my chance to interview you.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, we'll work on some questions for me. And with that, that's all the time we have. That is all for this episode of The Energy Question. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.